Alright, guys, so I have economic updates for you. The world is getting crazier, and many countries are at a point of desperation. We have Europe moving closer and closer towards a war economy. Germany is next on the recession chopping block, and it seems that their companies are running away to greener pastures. And Argentina has vowed to do the unthinkable. Inflation is still out of control, and Javier Milei is dead set on dollarizing his entire economy. And today's theme is about desperation and the deadly effects it can have. And let's talk about the Munich Security Conference. Now, a lot of things went down there. We had Ukraine pushing to meet China to discuss a peace plan, but I seriously doubt that will happen. It's kind of hard to imagine Beijing entertaining him. But let's focus on Zelensky's Eurozone tour to Germany and France because he has single handedly turned the EU into a war economy. The amount of money flowing from Europe to Ukraine is staggering. It looks like he's going to get much more. Ukraine gets long-term German and French security guarantees. Agreements were signed in Berlin and Paris, and like it or not, more money is heading there. Even though Europe is stagnating, with Germany one leg in the recession coffin, more money is going to Ukraine. And we have to ask why. Is it really just about fighting the Russians, or is there something more? And here's how much Europe is going to give Ukraine again. Olaf Scholz has pledged 1.1 billion euros from Germany to buy artillery systems. Macron has pledged 3 billion euros from France as well. Now, obviously, this is a delay tactic to get funding to Ukraine, or else they'll lose even more ground at Adivka. Things are looking really bad, and it's understandable why Zelensky wants any aid he can get. But why is Europe so enthusiastic about sending Ukraine money even though their own economies are in trouble? And this is the $1 trillion question, and I think we have the answer here. During a press conference, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, told everyone why aid to Ukraine might be the best kept secret for an economy. According to him, 90% of military assistance to Ukraine has actually been spent here in the US with our manufacturers and our production. That provides more jobs and more growth in our economy. So, war spending benefits the US economy and drives up GDP. That part is crystal clear. And if you're the EU, your options to save your economy are rather limited today. Energy prices are high, so your manufacturing is no longer competitive. Countries like China and Japan, they're already seeing a decline in their exports. Global demand is contracting. But what is the one country that will need demand for your products no matter the cost? Ukraine. War is business, and the more weapons you supply, the more stuff you can make back home for economic growth. Now, of course, the big reason is to try to keep up with the Russian war machine. According to Putin, over 500,000 new jobs have been created in his own military industrial complex, and as a whole, the sector employs 2.5% of the entire Russian population. And because of this, salaries are going up in the sector, which means more spending in the Russian economy. Is a big reason why Russia's economy grew by 3.6% in 2023 after a contraction the year before. It's not the best type of growth, but a war economy allows you to improve the GDP numbers and keep people employed, at least in the short term. So there's a need for the West to ante up. They can't keep up with the production of shells and ammunition, and that's the physical aspect of the war, but the financial aspect is just as concerning. Growth in the EU will stagnate, with new estimates downgrading all their GDP forecasts for last year and this year as well. Germany has already contracted in 2024, and the situation for France is looking quite dangerous as well. The French economy is flirting with recession. Q3 was negative, Q4 was flat, and estimates for this quarter and next are 0.2% at best. And we all know these forecasts are very optimistic. It's a strong economy until reality hits. But that's not all. France has a massive unemployment problem, and Macron needs to create jobs or he'll be in big trouble. France's unemployment rate is slowly rising. It hit 7.5% in December last year, but it was 7.1% in 2022. So more people are unemployed in France today. This is more fuel for the Le Pen camp who's hungry for Macron's job. He has pledged 5% unemployment by 2027, the end of his second term, but the data isn't looking very good. By 2025, unemployment is slated to increase to 7.8%. That's 10% higher when Macron was re-elected. So there's a sense of desperation in the air when shifting to a war economy might be the only way left. We have to solve the economic growth problem. And shifting closer towards a war economy, no matter how distasteful it might be, does solve this problem. According to the Cato Institute, Producing weapons is counted positively towards the GDP, while destroying things isn't counted at all. Additionally, war can increase GDP per capita by reducing unemployment and shifting people's focus to wartime production. Just like Russia and the US, the EU is realizing this. Sure, this isn't good for their industries in the long term, but there is an incentive to keep the war machine going. Giving it to Ukraine doesn't just help to fight the Russians, it helps to bolster the Eurozone economy as well. It's no surprise that Macron is pushing the defense industry into a full war economy mode. He wants the production of weapons to increase not just to counter the Russian machine, but to boost economic growth as well. If you can keep producing weapons, your GDP can grow instead. And speaking of desperation, we must talk about the big exodus of companies from Germany. For over a year, we have heard of the decoupling narrative from the West away from China, and there are many reasons given. One is friendshoring, working with countries friendly to the US. Another is the idea that China's economy is collapsing, so moving there isn't a smart idea, it's all over the headlines. But let's look at the data because it tells us something completely different from what we are led to believe. German direct investment into China has risen to a historic record in 2023. Even though Olaf Scholz is pushing for decoupling, foreign direct investment into China has been the highest since 2014. Money is flowing there in spades. Looking at the flow of German investment, we can see something really interesting. The total flow of FDI from Germany to China has reached 12 billion euros. Sure, there's some money heading out of China. Companies took out 3 billion euros, but 15 billion was reinvested back into the country. That's German capital, German money choosing to stay in China. Money always follows the path of least resistance to grow itself. Businesses in Germany know that China still holds tremendous advantages over other parts of the world. And let's consider the background Europe is operating in. You have the UK in recession, GDP growth has gone negative. Japan, another G7 ally, is also in an official recession. The US is more of an industrial competitor than an economic ally. For companies, the options are few and far between. Other countries like Vietnam just don't have the supply chains fleshed out for cost effective manufacturing and rapid distribution. And here are some wild numbers from the German Chambers of Commerce. 73% of large companies operating in China plan to increase investment over the next 2 years. Even amongst the smallest companies, half of them have plans to double down on China as well. A clear reason is the access to Russian energy, so manufacturing costs in China are cheaper. Your products are more affordable, which is essential as we all are moving towards a global recession. But there's another big reason why German brands are moving over. They still see China as a large and growing market. They have an immense customer base with the middle class still growing strong. And it's true that China's overall population is declining, but it's still over 1.4 billion people. Beijing has also signaled a move towards domestic consumption instead of exports. So if you want to access the Chinese markets easily, it's best to be stationed there directly. The main driver of China's economy today and going forward is going to be domestic consumption. Exports are dropping while the main boost to GDP is coming directly from the local Chinese people themselves. And there's another exciting statistic we must consider. China's consumer spending could be heading up soon. During the recent Lunar New Year holiday, train travels have surged, hitting nearly 15 million trips in a single day. This might be a positive signal of increasing domestic spending. If you're dead broke, you won't have the time or money to travel, but there's a big resurgence in domestic travel, so consumption in China is growing, and it kind of makes sense for German companies to rush in and grab a slice of the pie. You have to skate to where the puck will be. If your home country is in decline, you need to look elsewhere. And for Germany, that elsewhere seems to be China. And let's talk about our final story of desperation. Things in Argentina aren't looking good. Javier Milei is angry because inflation is still wrecking his country. He's furious over the inflation data and has re-emphasized his key goals of zero deficit and dollarization. In other words, he wants to replace the Argentine peso with the US dollar and dollarize the entire economy, finishing their central bank. And you can truly understand this anger to run towards the dollar. Argentina's inflation crisis is still a persistent problem. People are getting poorer and poorer with each passing month. Prices in Argentina has risen by 20.6% in January this year alone. Granted, this has come down from 25.5% in December, but it's still a national crisis. It's a good reason why Milei is hopping mad. 20% inflation a month means a gallon of milk at $10 in January will cost $12 30 days later. Let that sink in for a moment. It's 6 times the rate of US inflation compressed into a single month. And if this happened back in the US, I'm quite sure there would be riots on the street. 20% inflation a month is simply unthinkable. But this is where things get rather dangerous. Milei has dropped a statement that we must pay attention to, and it tells us that the path forward for Argentina is a really risky path. There'll be a lot of pain to accomplish this. The zero deficit is non negotiable. Cleaning up the central bank balance sheet is non negotiable. Let's break this down. Milei, he has telegraphed the punch. There'll be more job losses coming in the months ahead. Reducing the budget deficit means trimming away the fat. A lot of government workers could be fired in the months and even the years ahead. So political stability might be an issue here. But let's focus a bit on his end goal, which is dollarizing Argentina's economy. If Milei is serious and going all the way, that means two hammers are about to drop on the Argentine people. The former finance minister of Argentina had this important thing to say about Milei's plan for dollarization. It is essential that a free exchange rate be allowed to operate without any type of interference from the central bank. In other words, no one will believe Milei's dollarization proposal unless you can freely exchange Argentine pesos for US dollars, no restrictions at all. That means another currency devaluation is coming. It's just a matter of time. A peso devaluation will come sooner or later if Milei is really serious about dollarizing the economy. So the buying power of the local Argentine people will crash again. And that's the first outcome that's baked into the cake. The second part is the privatization of everything. To dollarize the economy, obviously, you need to bring in more US dollars in. There's a reason why Milei was pushing hard to privatize the state oil company YPF before getting rejected. When you go international, you can bring in private capital, which means US dollars coming into the economy. Effectively, the private sector will be helping to dollarize your economy. Now, that sounds good on paper, but even if you put aside the job losses, there's the issue of financial sovereignty. That's a very big blind spot. When you dollarize the economy, you are outsourcing monetary policy to the Federal Reserve. Powell's decision will effectively control Argentina's fate, control their economy. Countries can't adjust their interest rates to regulate their economy. There will be misaligned priorities. The Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates primarily in response to the US economy, not other countries. So if the Fed decides to keep interest rates high, when Argentina needs low rates to stimulate growth, they are screwed. If the Federal Reserve sets rates at 5%, there's no way for Argentina to set rates at 1 or 2% and really expect investment to come. The money simply won't flow there. They have to set rates above 5% to attract capital. They also can't print money in emergency to avoid a debt default. There's a reason why most countries use their own local currencies, because their needs are very different from the US economy. In most cases, they are not similar at all. Secondly, by dollarizing their economy, Argentina is actually under US foreign policy as well. If sanctions come down on you, then your economy is in trouble. You could be cut away from the dollar system and SWIFT, and that will be a disaster, especially if you're an emerging economy. So yes, using the dollar to reduce inflation might be a good first step, but there are serious dangers under the surface to be aware of. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out. But let me know what you think. Is Argentina making a good move to dollarize everything? And is Europe really moving more towards a war economy? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.